the woman who gave birth to rabbits. The curious case of Mary Toft. In September 1726, news reached the court of King George I of the alleged birth of several rabbits to Mary Toft of Godalming near Guildford in Surrey. Toft was a 25-year-old illiterate servant, married to Joshua Toft, a journeyman clothier. According to reports, despite having had a miscarriage just a month earlier in August 1726, Mary had still appeared to be pregnant. On September 27th, she went into labor and was attended initially by her neighbor Mary Jill, and then her mother-in-law, Anne Toft. She gave birth to something resembling a liverless cat. The family decided to call on the help of Guildford obstetrician John Howard. He visited Mary the next day, where he was presented with more animal parts, which Anne Toft said she had taken from Mary during the night. The following day, Howard returned and helped deliver yet more animal parts. Over the next month, Howard recorded that she began producing a rabbit's head, the legs of a cat, and in a single day, 9 dead baby rabbits. Howard sent letters to some of England's greatest doctors and scientists and the king's secretary, informing them of the miraculous births. The curious king dispatched 2 men to investigate to see what they could ascertain about this case: Nathaniel Street, André, Swiss surgeon anatomist to the king, and Samuel Molyneux, secretary to the Prince of Wales. By now, news had spread, and Mary was a local celebrity, which necessitated moving her from Godalming to nearby Guildford, so that she could be monitored more closely by John Howard. On November 15th, André and Molyneux arrived at Howard's home in Guildford, and were immediately greeted with the news that Mary was in labor with her 15th rabbit. Toft gave birth to several more dead rabbits in their presence. The doctors conducted examinations on the lungs and other internal organs of these rabbits, the results of which showed that they probably did not develop inside Mary's womb. André, however, still seemed convinced that her case was genuine. He believed that these were indeed supernatural births, and took some of the rabbit specimens back to London to show the king and the Prince of Wales. As the story of Mary Toft quickly spread through London, the king decided to send a German surgeon, Cyriacus Ahlers, and his friend Mr. Brand to Guildford to investigate the matter further. Ahlers examined Mary and witnessed several of her rabbit births. However, he was not convinced. On examination of the rabbit parts he had taken back to London, Ahlers found that the dung pellets in the rectum of one of the rabbits contained corn, hay and straw, which proved that it could not have developed inside Mary. Ahlers reported back to the king on November 21st that he suspected a hoax with Mary Toft and John Howard in collusion, and showed these rabbit specimens as evidence. Meanwhile, Sir Richard Manningham, an eminent doctor and midwife among upper-class society in London, was contacted by St. André to attend upon Mary Toft. After observing her and seeing her give birth to what he believed was a hog's bladder, he also seemed unconvinced. But he was persuaded to keep his doubts to himself by Howard and Stust André until there was proof of any fraud. Howard and Stust André were trying to save their reputations in the light of what Ahlers had concluded. The story came to the attention of the press and caused a national sensation. Interest in monstrosities and willingness to pay to see them was common in Europe in the mid-18th century. It is not hard to see why a poor family like the Tofts saw a way to make money with what seems, at first, a ridiculous scheme, as monstrous or deformed people had been exhibited at a price all over Europe for hundreds of years, with poor and wealthy alike equally fascinated. Mary Toft's explanation for her strange births was that in April 1726, she had been working in a field and was startled by a rabbit. She and another woman ran after it, but could not catch it. They also failed to catch another rabbit that they had chased. That same night she dreamt she was in a field with those 2 rabbits in her lap, and awakened with a sick fit, which lasted till morning. From that time for above 3 months, she had a constant and strong desire to eat rabbits, but being very poor and indigent, could not procure any. 1. St. André published his account of the affair, a short narrative of an extraordinary delivery of rabbits on 3 December 1726. Dr. James Douglas, the respected anatomist and man midwife, read the draft of this book and declared it nothing but a collection of impossibilities. Maternal impression, according to medical theory, was a phenomenon that explained the existence of birth defects and congenital disorders. The theory was that an emotional stimulus experienced by a pregnant woman, such as Mary's rabbit dreams and her desire for rabbit meat, could influence the development of the fetus. Mental problems, such as depression or schizophrenia, were believed to be a manifestation of similar feelings in the mother. For instance, A woman who experienced great sadness whilst pregnant might imprint depressive tendencies onto the fetus she was carrying. A famous example of this theory is the case of Joseph Merrick, the so-called Elephant Man. He wrote in his autobiographical pamphlet, "The deformity which I am now exhibiting was caused by my mother being frightened by an elephant. My mother was going along the street when a procession of animals was passing by. There was a terrible crush of people to see them, and unfortunately she was pushed under the elephant's feet, which frightened her very much. This occurring during a time of pregnancy was the cause of my deformity." The fact that he was able to say this as if it were a literal fact is quite a telling example of how many people still believed in this theory in the mid to late 19th century. 5 months after the Mary Toft affair was exposed as a hoax, James Blondel published his The Strength of Imagination in Pregnant Women, examined, in which he challenged the belief in the prenatal influence of the imagination. The debate he started continued well into the next century. On November 29th, Mary Toft was brought to Lacey's Bagnio, Bath House, in London's Leicester Fields, where she could be observed more closely. St. Andre contacted Dr. James Douglas and asked him to come to the Bagnio to observe Mary's rabbit births. By the time Douglas arrived, he found himself in the company of a large crowd of doctors and medical men who had been summoned by Stust. Andre. Unfortunately for Stust, Andre, who was desperate to have Douglas validate the rabbit births, Douglas believed the whole affair to be a fraud. Between 30th November and 3rd December, opinion was divided among the medical men gathered there. Mary produced no more new rabbits, but continued to appear to go into labor. She was also badly infected, and had fits which made her lose consciousness. Shortly thereafter, a porter at Mr. Lacey's Bagnio was caught trying to sneak a rabbit into Mary Toft's room. He confessed to Douglas and Manningham that Margaret Toft, Mary's sister-in-law, had asked him to procure the smallest rabbit he could find. Manningham and Douglas were determined to obtain a confession of guilt from Mary, but decided to see if she would incriminate herself. They didn't have long to wait, as she went into labor on 4th December, but produced nothing. On that evening they called Sir Thomas Clarges, Justice of the Peace, to the Bagnio. The porter, Thomas Howard, swore a deposition before him, and Clarges immediately took Mary into custody for questioning, but she would admit nothing. Over the next 2 days, much pressure was put upon her to confess, but Mary held out until Sir Richard Manningham threatened to perform painful experimental surgery on her, to see if she was formed differently from other women. Toft was forced to admit on 7th December 1726 that she had manually inserted dead rabbits into her vagina, and then allowed them to be removed as if she were giving birth. In several different confessions, she implicated a mysterious stranger, the wife of the organ grinder, her mother-in-law, and John Howard. On the 9th December, Mary Toft was charged with being a notorious and vile cheat, and sent to Bridewell Prison, where allegedly she was exhibited to large, curious crowds by her warders. In the aftermath of the hoax, the medical profession suffered a great deal of mockery for what the public viewed as its gullibility. On December 9th, Stust. Andre had an advertisement, shown above, published in the Daily Journal, to try and vindicate his own behavior. Doctors responded to the Toft affair in print, as many were concerned that the episode had damaged the reputation, not only of the doctors involved, but of the profession as a whole. One of the many tracts and pamphlets that appeared during the saga was The Anatomist Dissected by Lemuel Gulliver. Jonathan Swift had published his satire, Gulliver's Travels, in 1726. This pamphlet claims that Lemuel Gulliver, surgeon and anatomist to the kings of Lilliput and Blefuscu, and Fellow of the Academy of Sciences in Balnibarbi, is its author. The case also proved to be irresistible to contemporary artists. In this satirical print, William Hogarth pokes fun at the incompetence of the early 1700s medical profession. All the main characters in the Toft saga are featured, the doctors being shown as ignorant and credulous fools. Many Britons were angry about the Hanoverian king's preference for German-speaking courtiers and physicians. This is amply demonstrated by the plethora of pamphlets and drawings that appeared in the wake of the Toft scandal, ridiculing Stust, Andre, and the German court physicians, and depicting them as gullible, or even worse, as charlatans. Public interest in the case died out by around January of the following year, but the repercussions continued for those involved. For Sir Richard Manningham and James Douglas, there had been temporary embarrassment regarding their close connection with the affair, but their careers and reputations were secure. Saint Andre, however, lost favor with the court, and as his reputation plummeted, his patients deserted him. He retired from London and eventually died in poverty in an almshouse in Southampton. John Howard had to answer charges of being concerned in the cheat and conspiracy of Mary Toft, but the case against him was dropped, and he remained a respected figure in Guildford. As for Mary Toft, the case against her was dismissed, not for lack of proof of guilt, but probably because of the further embarrassment to the establishment that would ensue if the case were pursued any further. She spent a few months in jail, then returned to relative obscurity. In the years that followed the scandal, the Duke of Richmond, who had a residence near Godalming, sometimes showed her at dinner parties for the curiosity of his guests. In April 1740, Mary was charged with receiving stolen goods and committed to the House of Correction in Guildford, but was later acquitted by the jury. She died on 13th January 1763. The London paper's obituary columns announced her death alongside those of peers and statesmen.